Hey, Peter, great to be working with you again. Super solid progress here. Congrats. Another 2 seconds off that PB, which we always love to see. Still more time to go. Kind of changing a little bit of our focal points now as we start to get closer to the limit here. So let's go ahead, start breaking down. Turn one, still can definitely work on trying to break deeper and deeper and deeper into this break zone here. What I'd like to be able to see is get up to our peak break pressure earlier. So we can really see we're at 0.6, 0.7 Gs right now. We're already a decent distance into our break zone. And I don't really see that peak break pressure come until after that access road, right? And then we release off of it pretty quickly. So what I want you to think about in turn one is really trying to ramp up to peak break pressure a little bit earlier and then trailing off. That's going to allow us to break deeper and stay full throttle longer on that front straightaway, which is what we want to do. But really solid job trail breaking down the apex point. Great apex, great kind of delay or patience to throttle. Getting back to full throttle, exactly where I want to see you using that out road on exit. Definitely have more opportunity on the entry of the corner, being able to roll in more speed. And I think it's going to come from getting confidence of breaking a little bit deeper into turn one. Turn three, it's a very similar note. Ultimately, I don't think we're breaking very deep here. I think we can actually break, if anything, tiny bit deeper. But what we're going to see is this lap is we miss our apex point, right? So we miss our apex point. We're wide a little bit of the apex, and we can't quite get back to full throttle as aggressive as I'd like to see us because we missed that apex point. Now, in turn three, interesting enough, we do a little bit better job of getting quicker to peak brake pressure, but I still think we could be a little bit more aggressive on the brakes right now and then trail in with just a little bit, continue to hold just a little bit more brake pressure in here, a little bit more brake pressure, because it's really important here to get down to this apex point. So like turn three, it's almost a little bit the opposite of turn one. Like turn one, I care more about the entry speed for the most part than the exit speed. Turn three, I care more about getting a good exit, but I don't want to then lag on entry. So I like that we're attacking. I like that we're trying to push that entry. This was just a little bit too much. So I've pushed us wide of the apex, and that didn't allow us to really unwind the steering wheel. So like right now, I need to be able to unwind the steering wheel, but you can't unwind until out over here because you missed that apex point. And that's costing us down this straightaway. So just make sure we get down to that apex point. Alrighty. So now into turn five. In a break zone, we've got to think about how does the road or the track affect how we attack the brakes. So turn five is this really interesting break zone here where we're kind of braking before it really drops downhill, but then it drops downhill in the middle of the break zone, but then it flattens out again here. So what I want you thinking about here is you've got less grip when you go downhill, but then all of a sudden you get added grip as the road flattens out. So a traditional break zone, as we talked about like in turn one, is going to look something like this, right? Like that's sort of what we want our braking arc to look like. In turn five, it's a really interesting braking mark where I'm going to come up, get really heavy on the initial brake pressure. I'm going to get really light or relatively light through the middle part of the brake zone as I come downhill. But as the road flattens out, I can add that more brake pressure back into the car because I've got additional grip. And then I don't have much of a trail brake here because you have so much grip on that really dark pavement. We don't need to trail brake as much. That really helps get the car pointed. So what I want you thinking about in turn five is how can I get a little bit lighter? I want you still attacking those brakes hard and getting up to peak brake pressure relatively quickly as well. So let's take a look here. Coming in, boom. I should see 0.9 already. Super, like it's not an on-off switch, but working to hard brake pressure. Here I'm getting much lighter on the brake pressure right now. And then I'm adding brake pressure back in here as the road flattens out. And then I'm still kind of almost hard on the brakes right now. And then I'm coming off. And then ultimately here, this is another area where now we're rolling just a little bit too much speed to the middle part of the corner because I really need to see you on throttle or getting back to throttle now. But notice because we rolled a little bit too much through the midpoint of the corner, I'm only getting back to the throttle here. So now we're starting we made too much of a change. Now we're too late to initial throttle. We need to work on getting back to initial throttle a little bit earlier here. And if anything, I'd like to see you turn a little bit later into turn five. So right now, notice how you're sort of coming in and apexing the start of this gray curb here, I'd rather see you apex about a half car length later, because I think why you're not able to get back to throttle where I'd like to see you is because we're looking too straight. And I want to turn a little later, get the car looking a little bit more down the road. So boom, right at the apex point, getting aggressive back to throttle. And right about here, I'm working it back to full throttle. Turn 6, you're doing fantastic. I think it's one of the more difficult corners on this racetrack, but I got not much for you here. Great job coming off the brakes, coast, good patience to throttle, working it back to full throttle here. Like, that's awesome. Turn 7, we have an opportunity here to roll in a little bit more entry speed. I want to see you slowly work up to it. One suggestion would be is to start to feed the throttle back in here. So in high speed corners, I'm okay with the throttle coming before the apex point. Same in the kink. I'm okay with the throttle coming before the apex point because it loads the rear end, gives us more security. The second part of high speed corners is quite often when I look at them, my throttle trace, when I pick up the throttle, isn't something like this. It's not bam, back to full throttle. It's usually something that looks a little bit more like this. It takes a little bit longer for me to work it back to full throttle. So when I look at this and I see from the time we go from 0% throttle to full throttle's a car length at most, that's showing me that we're under driving the car a little bit here. So what I'd like to see is do everything the same, start to feed the throttle a little bit back in here, feed it in, feed it in, feed it in, feed it in, and then you're working back to full throttle a little bit out over here. That should help you increase your speed a little bit more through the middle part of that corner. But ultimately, 120 Ks through there, really fast corner. I think you're performing well. We can just be a little bit more through the middle part of the corner. All righty, turn 8. Again, another corner here I'd like to see you challenge the brake zone a little bit more, but ultimately turn 8 looks pretty solid to me. I would just say, again, when I look at how quickly we can go from 0% throttle to full throttle, that's typically a sign here when we're full throttle this early that we're under driving the car a little bit. So just try to roll a little bit more speed through the middle part of the corner and then maybe get back to full throttle and a car length or a half car length later will really help you. So carousel, great improvement. What I want you to work on now is continue to drive it harder in on entry. So look at your throttle here. So we're turning in full throttle, great. But what happens now is we're really quick off the throttle. We turn in full throttle and then boom, down to 0% throttle. And then what ends up happening is we're then too early back on throttle. So what I want to see you work on in the carousel is I want to see you trying to work it in, turn it in full throttle. I'm okay with starting to lift here, but just be slower off the throttle. Trying to keep some throttle, 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 trying to keep some throttle. So driving it in harder. And then what ends up happening is where you're starting to add throttle back in, that's where I'm getting off, completely off the throttle. And now I'm starting to have the car take me wider. So see how you're holding this white line all the way through here? I'm driving it harder down that white line. As I get down that white line, that's typically where I'm coming off the last bit of throttle. Now the car takes me that tire width off the white line kind of back in here. So I'm coming off a little bit wider. And then what ends up happening is I'm on a little bit of throttle. I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive to throttle to you than you here. Because what I want to be able to do is really within this range right now, I've sort of identified that curb here, right? I see that second curb, that second apex curb coming. So as I kind of look around here, I want to drive it a little harder so I get the car a little bit wider. And then what that allows me to do is as I want to get the car turning down to that second apex point, I'm actually going to come off the throttle a little bit. Why? Because that's what transitions the weight to the front nose and helps me get that rotation. So I want to drive it a little bit harder in, harder through the middle. So the car takes me just that tire width wider. Now is where I want that car to transition. So this is where I'm coming off the throttle. So I can come back on the throttle now, and then I can be back to full throttle here versus here, right? So we could be a little bit more aggressive on the entry part of this corner. Kink as well. Ultimately, this is the highest risk, highest reward corner here. What I really like is we're making our speed manipulations in a straight line. Braking in a straight line, we're turning in, we're off, back on throttle in a great spot. Everything here looks really solid. But as you see here, we have a little bit of road out to our left-hand side that we're not using. We really only get out to this exit curb at the very end of it. So as you get more comfortable here, I want to make sure your eyes are picking up earlier on corner exit. I want to see you kind of get out in parallel with the exit curve about here. We don't need to get out to the other side of it. Just get out in parallel with this exit curve a little bit earlier. And as you want to start to pick up speed in the kink, all I want you focusing on is braking a little bit lighter, braking a little bit lighter. So not trying to go super deep on the brakes, not trying to trail brake into the kink, just try to work on braking a little bit lighter. And you can see, look how we only get out to that exit curb at the very end of it, where I'm usually kind of out in parallel with the curb, kind of back in this range right now. Just an opportunity for us to continue to gain some time a little bit there in the kink. All righty, coming into Canada corner. I think we're definitely making some large chunk of gain here. Nice job really trying to challenging this brake zone. I think that brake zone is really, really solid. Notice here, this is the highest brake G that I see on this racetrack. You should see almost the same amount of G's on the brakes as here as I see in turn 1 and see in turn 5, I see in turn 8. So that's why I know that we can brake more aggressively in all of those corners, because you're doing it here, right? So really solid job. Canada ultimately to me looks great. Back on throttle, back to full throttle. Keep it up. I keep, one small note here for Billy Mitchell is I keep wanting to see you hold the car a little bit wider, a little bit wider, a little bit wider, and only come down and apex this black curb later so that you can have your hands more straight. When you get here too early, you're really making this a corner. So now you're having to turn, and then really quick back to the left. And cars don't like to shift weight that quickly, right? So I know it doesn't seem like much, and it probably won't feel like much, but by holding it wider, turning it slower, you're going to have less of this weight going this way, back to this way. And I think that's going to help you be more consistent in Billy Mitchell as well. And I saw your notes that you fell on your faster lap. You kind of messed up this area, and I'm wondering if it might have been because of that. Other than that, really good job through here. Good job on throttle, working it back to full throttle. Better job into 14. One of our major goals was full throttle past this bridge. Not quite there yet, right? So I want to really see full throttle until at least here, and then continue to brake. Still braking, coming off the brakes. Your initial throttle application is perfect. Work it back to full throttle. Everything else is great. We still have an opportunity for time game on entry to 14. Full throttle as you come under that bridge, and then we're starting to brake. Kind of still one of our major goals here. So, we're making some changes here now that you're driving at a higher level and get better fundamentals. We're kind of changing some of the focus on how we're manipulating the brakes into turn 5, right? Braking a little bit, challenging the brake zone still more into turn 1, into turn 8 as well, but building consistency around that so that you can consistently challenge those brake zones and use that deeper brake zone to roll in more entry speed as well. So you need to make sure your eyes are up. Let me know if you have any questions, but I'm really, really happy with this progress. Awesome work, and can't wait to see the next one.